The winter of 1847 came early to the Oregon Territory, bringing with it the kind of cold that made your bones ache and your breath freeze in the air. 12-year-old Lucy had never experienced anything quite like it. She would wake up each morning to find frost covering the inside of their small cabin windows, creating beautiful patterns that looked like tiny forests made of ice. Lucy's family had been living on their homestead for almost 3 years now. Her father, Thomas, had built their home with his own hands, log by log, while her mother, Mary, had turned their small patch of land into something that actually felt like home. They had chickens that provided eggs, a vegetable garden that somehow survived the harsh conditions, and a barn that housed their 2 horses and a milk cow named Bessie. Life out here wasn't easy. The nearest neighbor lived more than 5 miles away, and the closest town was a full day's ride on horseback. When storms hit, which they did often during winter, the family could be completely cut off from the outside world for weeks at a time. But they had learned to prepare for these times, storing food, firewood, and supplies to last through the worst weather. On this particular February morning, the snow had been falling steadily for 3 days. Lucy pressed her face against the cold window glass, watching the white flakes dance in the wind. Everything outside looked peaceful and quiet, like the whole world had been covered with a giant white blanket. She could barely make out the outline of their barn through the swirling snow. Her father was already up, as he always was before sunrise. Thomas believed in starting each day early, no matter how cold or dark it might be. The animals needed to be fed and watered, and in weather like this, that was even more important than usual. Lucy could hear him moving around in the kitchen, probably starting a fire in the stove to warm up some coffee. "Lucy, come help me with breakfast," her mother called from the kitchen. Mary was already busy preparing their morning meal, some leftover bread from the day before, eggs from their chickens, and porridge made from oats they had stored in the cellar. As Lucy helped set the table, her father came back inside, stomping the snow off his boots and shaking the ice from his coat. Something about his expression made both Lucy and her mother stop what they were doing. Thomas looked troubled, like he had seen something outside that bothered him. "What is it?" Mary asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Thomas sat down heavily in his chair and looked at both of them seriously. "I found tracks in the snow near the property line, fresh ones from last night." In this part of the territory, tracks could mean many things. Sometimes they belonged to wild animals looking for food during the harsh winter. Sometimes they belonged to other settlers passing through. But sometimes, and this was what worried everyone in these parts, they could belong to people who might not be friendly. The relationship between the settlers and the local tribes had been tense for years. Both groups were trying to survive in the same difficult land, and misunderstandings often led to conflicts. Thomas had always tried to avoid trouble, keeping his family away from the disputes that seemed to flare up regularly between the two communities. After breakfast, Thomas decided to investigate the tracks more carefully. Lucy watched from the window as her father followed the trail through the snow. She could see him moving slowly, stopping frequently to examine something on the ground. Then, near the edge of their property where the forest began, he suddenly stopped and stood very still. Lucy pressed her face closer to the window, trying to see what had caught her father's attention. Through the falling snow, she could just make out a dark shape lying in the white drifts. At first, she thought it might be a fallen tree branch or maybe an animal that had died during the storm. But then she saw her father kneel down beside it, and she realized it was much more than that. Thomas stayed there for several minutes before standing up and looking back toward the house. Even from a distance, Lucy could see the worry on his face. He began walking back quickly, his boots crunching through the deep snow. When he came through the door, Thomas looked directly at his wife. "Mary, I need you to prepare some hot water and get the medical supplies ready. What did you find?" she asked, already moving toward their medicine chest. "There's a man out there. He's hurt badly, and he's been lying in the snow for who knows how long. If we don't help him soon, he's going to die." Lucy felt her heart start beating faster. "What kind of man, Papa?" Her father paused before answering. He's one of the local tribe members. Looks like he might have been wounded in some kind of fight or accident." The room became very quiet. Lucy knew that helping someone from the local tribe could be dangerous for their family. Some of the other settlers in the area wouldn't understand, and some members of the tribe might think it was some kind of trick. But she also knew her parents, and she could already see in their faces that they had made their decision. "We can't. Just leave him out there to die," Mary said firmly. "No matter who he is or where he comes from." Thomas nodded. "That's exactly what I was thinking, but we need to be careful about this." Very careful. Together, her parents went back outside into the storm. Lucy watched from the window as they made their way to where the injured man lay in the snow. She could see them working together to lift him, her father taking most of the weight. While her mother supported the man's head and shoulders, they brought him to the barn rather than the house. This made sense for several reasons. The barn was warmer than being outside, but it was also separate from where the family lived. If the man was dangerous or if other people came looking for him, the family would have some protection. Lucy wasn't allowed to go to the barn at first. Her parents wanted to assess the situation and make sure it was safe. She could only watch from the house as her mother carried blankets and hot water out to the barn, while her father brought lanterns to provide light and warmth. Hours passed before her parents finally returned to the house. They both looked tired and worried. The man was alive, but just barely. He had several deep wounds that looked like they might have come from weapons, and he was burning up with fever. Mary had cleaned and bandaged his injuries as best she could, but they didn't have the kind of medical supplies that someone in his condition really needed. "Will he live?" Lucy asked quietly. Her parents looked at each other. "We don't know," her father said honestly. "We're going to do everything we can for him, but he's very sick." That night, Lucy had trouble sleeping. She kept thinking about the stranger lying in their barn, fighting for his life. She wondered who he was, what had happened to him, and whether his family was somewhere out there looking for him. Most of all, she wondered if her own family was now in danger because they had decided to help him. The next morning brought no improvement in the man's condition. If anything, he seemed worse. His fever was higher, and he was having trouble breathing. Mary spent most of the day in the barn, trying to keep him comfortable and giving him small sips of water. Whenever he was conscious enough to drink, Lucy could see the strain this was putting on her parents. They were good people who couldn't bear to watch someone suffer, but they also knew they were taking a big risk. Word traveled fast in this territory, and it wouldn't be long before someone discovered what they were doing as the second day turned. Into evening, Lucy made a decision that would change everything. As the second day turned into evening, Lucy couldn't stop thinking about the man in their barn. She had watched her mother carry bowl after bowl of warm water out there, along with clean rags and what little medicine they had, but every time Mary came back to the house, her face looked more worried than before. During dinner, Lucy barely touched her food. She kept glancing toward the window that faced the barn, as if she could somehow see through the wooden walls to check on the stranger. Her parents noticed her distraction but didn't say much. They were both exhausted from taking turns caring for the wounded man throughout the day. "Mama," Lucy finally asked, "is he going to be okay?" Mary set down her fork and looked at her daughter with tired eyes. "I don't know, sweetheart. His fever is getting worse, and he's been shivering so much that I can hear his teeth chattering even when I pile every blanket we have on him." Thomas nodded grimly. "The man's been through something terrible. Those wounds on his chest and arm look like they came from a knife or maybe an arrowhead. Someone wanted to hurt him badly." Lucy felt a strange tightness in her chest. She had never seen anyone so close to death before. Sure, they had lost animals on the farm, and she remembered when her grandfather had passed away 2 years ago. But this was different. This was someone who might die simply because they didn't have enough supplies to help him properly. After dinner, Lucy helped her mother clean the dishes while her father went out to check on their patient one more time before bed. When he returned, his expression told them everything they needed to know. "His breathing is getting more shallow," Thomas said quietly. "I don't think he's going to make it through the night." That night, Lucy lay in her small bed listening to the wind howl outside their cabin. But even louder than the storm, she could hear the sound of her own heartbeat. Every few minutes she would look toward her window, wondering if the man in the barn was still alive. She thought about how scared he must be, lying there in a strange place surrounded by people he didn't know. What if he woke up and didn't understand where he was? What if he thought her family was going to hurt him? Lucy had heard stories about the conflicts between settlers and the local tribes, but she had never really understood what it all meant. Until now, around midnight, Lucy heard her mother get up and move quietly through the house. She was probably going to check on the man again. Mary had been doing this every few hours, even though it meant walking through the cold night air to reach the barn. Lucy waited until she heard the front door close, then crept to her window to watch. She could see the faint glow of a lantern moving across the yard toward the barn. Her mother was wearing her heavy winter coat and carrying what looked like another blanket. When Mary returned about 20 minutes later, Lucy quickly got back into bed and pretended to be asleep. But she could hear her mother moving around the kitchen, probably heating up more water, or preparing some kind of medicine. The next morning brought no good news. The man's fever had gotten even worse during the night, and he was barely conscious. Lucy's parents spoke in hushed tones over breakfast, discussing what else they could possibly do. "Maybe we should try to get him to the doctor in town," Mary suggested. Thomas shook his head. "He's too weak to survive that journey, especially in this weather. And besides, I'm not sure the doctor would even agree to treat him." Lucy knew what her father meant. Not all the people in their area were as willing as her parents to help someone from the local tribe. Some of the settlers had very strong feelings about keeping the two communities separate. After breakfast, Lucy asked if she could go see the man for herself. Her parents had been keeping her away from the barn, partly to protect her and partly because they weren't sure how the stranger might react to seeing a child. "I don't think that's a good idea," her father said. "He might be frightened if he sees you." But Lucy had been thinking about this all night. "Papa, what if he's scared because he doesn't know who we are? Maybe if he sees me, he'll understand that we're just a normal family trying to help him." Mary looked at Thomas and Lucy, could see them having one of those silent conversations that parents have. Finally, her mother nodded. "You can come with me when I bring him some water," Mary said. "But you have to stay close to me and do exactly what I say." A few minutes later, Lucy followed her mother through the snow to the barn. The wind had died down, but the air was still bitterly cold. Lucy pulled her coat tighter around herself as they approached the heavy wooden door inside the barn. The air was much warmer thanks to the body heat from their animals and several lanterns that her father had set up, but it still felt cold compared to their house. Lucy could hear Bessie the cow moving around in her stall, and one of their horses nickered softly when they entered. In the corner farthest from the animals, her parents had set up a makeshift bed, using hay bales and every spare blanket they owned. The wounded man was lying there, covered up to his chin, but Lucy could still see that he was shivering. As they got closer, Lucy got her first real look at the stranger. He appeared to be about her father's age, with long dark hair that was matted with sweat from his fever. His face was pale and drawn, and she could see that his lips were cracked from dehydration. Even unconscious, he looked like he was in pain. "He's been like this all morning," her mother whispered. "I can't get his fever to break, and he's barely drinking any water." Lucy stared at the man and felt something she had never experienced before. It was like a heavy weight in her stomach, mixed with an urgent need to do something, anything to help. She couldn't understand why someone would hurt another person so badly, and she couldn't bear the thought of him dying when they were trying so hard to save him. "Mama," she said quietly, "he looks so cold." Mary nodded sadly. "I've put every blanket we can spare on him, but nothing seems to help. His body is fighting so hard against the infection that he can't seem to get warm." Lucy looked around the barn, thinking. They had used all their extra blankets, but there was one more that might help. It was upstairs in her bedroom, folded carefully. In the wooden chest at the foot of her bed, the quilt had been made by her grandmother, who had passed away just before they moved to Oregon. It was the most beautiful thing Lucy owned, with tiny, perfect stitches forming patterns of flowers and birds in bright colors that somehow stayed cheerful even on the darkest days. Her grandmother had worked on that quilt for over a year, adding a little bit each evening by lamplight. When she finished it, she had wrapped Lucy in it and told her that it would always keep her safe and warm. No matter where life took her, Lucy had slept under that quilt every single night since they arrived in Oregon. When she was scared during storms, she would pull it over her head and remember her grandmother's gentle hands tucking her in. When she was lonely because there were no other children nearby to play with, she would trace the flower patterns with her finger and think about all the love that had gone into making it. But looking at the dying man, Lucy realized something important. Her grandmother had always taught her that the best way to honor someone's love was to share it with others. And right now, this stranger needed that love more than she did. "I'll be right back," Lucy told her mother. She ran through the snow back to the house and up to her bedroom. The quilt was exactly where she had left it, folded neatly in the chest. Lucy picked it up and held it against her face for a moment, breathing in the familiar smell that reminded her of home and safety. Then, without letting herself think about it too much, she ran back to the barn. "What are you doing?" her mother asked when she saw Lucy carrying the quilt. "He needs this more than I do," Lucy said simply. She walked over to the makeshift bed and gently placed her grandmother's quilt over the wounded man. The bright colors looked strange against his pale skin. But somehow, right at the same time, almost immediately, the man's shivering seemed to lessen. Whether it was because the quilt was warmer than the other blankets, or because something about Lucy's act of kindness had reached him, even in his fevered state, nobody could say. But for the first time since they had found him, he looked peaceful. Mary put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "That was a very grown-up thing to do," she said softly. Lucy nodded, surprised to find that giving away her most precious possession didn't make her feel sad. Instead, she felt something warm and light in her chest, like she had done exactly what she was supposed to do. What none of them knew was that eyes were watching from the forest beyond their property, eyes that had been searching for 3 days and had finally found what they were looking for. For 3 days, 2 young men had been moving through the forest like shadows. Their names were Running Fox and Gray Wolf, and they were some of the best trackers in their tribe. They could follow a trail that most people wouldn't even notice existed, reading signs in broken twigs, disturbed leaves, and footprints that were barely visible, but this trail had been different from any they had followed before. It told a story of violence and desperation. Someone had been hurt badly and was trying to get away from danger. The blood spots in the snow showed that the wounded person was losing strength with every step. The man they were looking for was called Quiet Bear, and he was more than just another member of their community. He was Gray Wolf's older brother and Running Fox's closest friend since childhood. 3 days ago, Quiet Bear had been part of a hunting party that had run into trouble with some hostile settlers near the river. Most of the hunting party had made it back safely, but Quiet Bear had been wounded trying to help others escape. In the confusion and darkness, he had become separated from the group. When the sun came up the next morning, there was no sign of him anywhere. The tribal leader, Chief Strong Eagle, had immediately organized search parties. Quiet Bear was not only loved by his family and friends, but he was also one of the tribe's most skilled hunters and one of their best peacemakers. He had always believed that the conflicts between his people and the settlers could be solved through understanding rather than fighting. Running Fox and Gray Wolf had volunteered to search the area where the attack had happened. They knew Quiet Bear better than anyone, and they understood how he thought. If he was hurt and trying to find help, where would he go? On the first day, they found the place where the attack had occurred. There were signs of a struggle, blood on the ground, and tracks showing that several men had been running through the trees. But the trail was confusing because so many people had been moving in different directions. On the second day, they picked up a single set of footprints leading away from the battle site. The tracks showed that whoever was making them was having trouble walking. Sometimes the footprints would disappear completely, suggesting that the person had fallen down and then gotten back up. By the third day, The trail was leading them toward an area where they knew some settler families had built their homes. This made both young men nervous. If Quiet Bear had collapsed near a settler homestead, what would the people there do to him? Some of the settler families in the area were peaceful and just wanted to live their lives without trouble. But others had very strong feelings about the local tribes, and those feelings were not friendly ones. Running Fox and Gray Wolf had heard stories about wounded tribal members who had been turned away from settler homes or, worse, killed by people who saw them as enemies. As they followed the trail through the forest, Gray Wolf began to notice something strange. "Look at these tracks," he said, pointing to marks in the snow near a large pine tree. Running Fox knelt down to examine what his friend had found. Mixed in with Quiet Bear's footprints were the tracks of two other people, one large set that probably belonged to a grown man, and one smaller set that looked like they might have been made by a woman or even a child. "Someone else has been here," Running Fox said quietly. "And recently." They followed the mixed tracks through the trees until they reached the edge of the forest. Ahead of them, across a small clearing, they could see a homestead. There was a log cabin with smoke rising from its chimney, a barn, and a few other small buildings. The two scouts found a good hiding place behind some thick bush, where they could watch the homestead without being seen. They had been trained since childhood to observe without being detected, and they settled in to see what they could learn. At first, everything looked normal. They saw a man come out of the cabin and walk to the barn, carrying what looked like a bucket of water. A little while later, a woman came out and hung some laundry on a line, despite the cold weather, but then they noticed something that made both of them pay closer attention. The woman made several trips to the barn, each time carrying different things: blankets, a pot of something hot, and what looked like medical supplies. Why would she be taking all those things to the barn? Gray Wolf whispered. Running Fox was wondering the same thing. Usually people kept their animals in the barn, not things like blankets and medicine, unless someone is in there, Running Fox said quietly. Someone who needs help? They watched for several more hours as both the man and woman continued to make trips to the barn. Sometimes they would stay inside for a long time before coming back out. Their behavior suggested that they were taking care of someone or something that required a lot of attention. As the day wore on, the two scouts began to see something that surprised them. A young girl, probably around 12 years old, came out of the cabin. She seemed upset about something and kept looking toward the barn with a worried expression on her face. Later, they watched as the girl followed her mother to the barn. The mother seemed reluctant to let the child come along, but eventually agreed. They stayed inside for quite a while before coming back out, but it was what happened next that truly amazed both Running Fox and Gray Wolf. The girl ran back into the cabin and came out a few minutes later carrying something colorful. Even from their hiding place in the forest, they could see that it was a beautiful quilt or blanket with bright patterns on it. The way she carried it suggested that it was something very special to her. Instead of keeping the blanket for herself, the girl ran straight to the barn. "Did you see that?" Gray Wolf whispered, hardly believing what he had witnessed. Running Fox nodded slowly. In their culture, giving away something precious was a sign of great respect and compassion. If this settler family was caring for someone in their barn, and if the young girl was willing to give up her own blanket to help that person, it could only mean one thing. "They found him," Running Fox said, "and they're trying to help him." This was not what either scout had expected to discover. They had prepared themselves to find Quiet Bear's body or to learn that he had been turned away from the settler's door. They had certainly not expected to find a white family risking their own safety to care for a wounded tribal member. Gray Wolf felt a mixture of relief and confusion. Why would they do this? They don't know him. For all they know, he could be dangerous. Running Fox had been thinking about the same question. "Look at how they're acting," he said. "The woman keeps bringing him medicine and food. The man built extra warmth in the barn with those lanterns, and the girl just gave him something that was obviously important to her. These are not the actions of people who see him as an enemy. As evening approached, the two scouts realized they needed to make a decision. They could continue watching to learn more, or they could return to their village to report what they had found. But there was also a third option that both of them were thinking about. "We should get closer, Gray," Wolf said finally. "We need to know for sure that it's really Quiet Bear in there, and we need to understand how badly he's hurt." Moving carefully through the darkness, they made their way closer to the homestead. The family had gone inside their cabin for the night, but light was still flickering in the barn windows. When they reached the barn, they could hear voices inside. A man and woman were talking quietly, and their words drifted through the wooden walls. "His fever is still too high," the woman was saying. "I don't know what else to do for him." "You've done everything possible," the man replied. "That quilt the girl gave him seems to have helped a little. At least he's not shivering as much." Running Fox and Gray Wolf looked at each other with amazement. Not only were these settlers caring for their friend, but they were genuinely worried about his condition. The woman sounded like she truly wanted to help him recover. Very carefully, Running Fox found a small gap between the wooden boards of the barn wall. Peering through, he could see the inside of the building. There, lying on a bed made of hay, and covered with several blankets, including the colorful quilt they had seen the girl carry, was Quiet Bear. He was alive, but he looked very sick. His face was pale and covered with sweat, and his breathing looked labored. But he was clean, his wounds had been bandaged, and he was surrounded by signs that someone was taking good care of him. Running Fox motioned for Gray Wolf to look through the gap as well. When his friend saw Quiet Bear, Gray Wolf had to put his hand over his mouth to keep from making a sound of relief. They had found him. He was alive. And somehow, miraculously, he had found his way to a family of settlers who were willing to risk everything to help him. But as the two scouts made their way back through the forest toward their village, they both knew that this discovery would create a situation unlike anything their tribe had ever faced before. The news they were carrying back would challenge everything their people believed about the settlers in their territory. What they didn't know was that their discovery would soon lead to one of the most remarkable gatherings in the history of both communities. Running Fox and Gray Wolf ran through the forest all night, their hearts pounding with excitement and worry. They had found their friend alive, but what they had discovered was so incredible that they wondered if anyone would believe them. When they finally reached their village as the sun was rising, people immediately gathered around them. Word had spread quickly that the two scouts were returning, and everyone was desperate for news about Quiet Bear. "Did you find him?" asked Morning Star, who was Quiet Bear's sister. Her face was filled with hope and fear at the same time. "We found him," Running Fox said, trying to catch his breath. "He's alive." A cheer went up from the crowd, but Gray Wolf held up his hand. "There's more, much more. We need to speak with Chief Strong Eagle right away." The chief was already waiting for them in the center of the village. He was a tall, dignified man with gray hair and wise eyes that seemed to see everything. Chief Strong Eagle had led their people through many difficult times, and everyone respected his judgment. "Tell me what you found," the chief said simply. Running Fox and Gray Wolf looked at each other, trying to decide how to explain what they had witnessed. Finally, Running Fox began to speak. "We followed Quiet Bear's trail for 3 days. It led us to a settler homestead near the edge of the forest. At first, we thought we might find his body or learn that he had been turned away. But what we discovered was something neither of us could have imagined." "Go on," Chief Strong Eagle said. "The settlers found him collapsed near their property. Instead of leaving him to die or driving him away, they brought him into their barn. They'd been caring for him for days, using their own medicine and blankets to try to help him recover." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not what anyone had expected to hear. Gray Wolf stepped forward. "Chief, we watched them for hours. The woman brought him food and water many times. The man set up lanterns to keep him warm. And their daughter ... double quote." He paused, still amazed by what he had seen. "Their daughter gave him her own blanket." A beautiful quilt that was obviously very special to her? The crowd became very quiet. Everyone understood the significance of such a gift. In their culture, giving away something precious was a sign of great honor and respect, but not everyone in the village was pleased with this news. Standing near the back of the crowd was a group of younger warriors led by a man named Broken Arrow. He was known for his fierce fighting skills and his strong feelings about the settlers. "How do we know this isn't a trick?" Broken Arrow called out. "Maybe they're keeping him alive to use as bait to trap more of our people." Several other warriors nodded in agreement. "The settlers have never shown us kindness before," one of them said. "Why would they start now?" An older woman named Singing Bird stepped forward. She was Quiet Bear's aunt and one of the most respected members of the tribe. "Because," she said firmly, "sometimes kindness exists even where we don't expect to find it. If these people wanted to harm Quiet Bear, they would have done so already. Instead, they are risking their own safety to help him." The debate continued for several hours. Some people believed that the settlers' actions were genuine, while others remained suspicious. The village was divided, with families arguing among themselves about what this news meant. Chief Strong Eagle listened to everyone's opinions without saying much. He was a leader who believed in hearing all sides before making important decisions. But as the morning wore on, it became clear that this situation was unlike anything their tribe had ever faced. Finally, the chief called for silence, running. "Fox and Gray Wolf," he said, "I want you to take me to this place. I need to see with my own eyes what you have described." "Chief," Broken Arrow interrupted, "that could be dangerous." "What if this is a trap?" Chief Strong Eagle looked at the young warrior calmly. "If it is a trap, then we will deal with it. But if it is not, then we may be witnessing something that could change the relationship between our people and the settlers forever." Later that day, a small group left the village. Besides the chief and the two scouts, they were joined by Singing Bird, who insisted on coming to see her nephew, and two other trusted warriors. They moved carefully through the forest, staying hidden as they approached the homestead. When they reached the hiding place that Running Fox and Gray Wolf had used the day before, Chief Strong Eagle spent a long time observing the settler family. He watched as the woman made her regular trips to the barn, carrying fresh water and what looked like soup. He saw the man chopping extra firewood and carrying it to the barn to keep the space warm, but it was when the young girl came outside that the chief's expression changed. She walked slowly to the barn, her shoulders slumped as if she was carrying a heavy burden. Even from a distance, anyone could see that she was worried about something. "She cares about him," Singing Bird whispered. "Look at her face. She's genuinely concerned about a person she doesn't even know." Chief Strong Eagle nodded slowly. In all his years of dealing with settlers, he had never seen anything like this. These people were not acting out of fear or obligation. They were acting out of compassion. As evening approached, the chief made a decision that would shock everyone in both communities. "We're going back to the village," he announced, "but we're not going alone." "What do you mean?" Gray Wolf asked. "I mean that tomorrow night we're coming back here, all of us. Every warrior, every elder, every member of our tribe who is able to make the journey." The small group stared at their leader in amazement. "Chief," Running Fox said carefully, "what are you planning?" Chief Strong Eagle looked toward the homestead, where lamplight was beginning to flicker in the barn windows. "I'm planning to do something that has never been done before. If these settlers can show unexpected kindness to one of our people, then perhaps it's time for us to show them what that kindness means to us." When they returned to the village that night, Chief Strong Eagle called for a gathering of the entire tribe. Men, women, children, and elders all came together around the great fire in the center of their community. "My people," the chief began, "today I have seen something that has changed my understanding of what is possible between our tribe and the settlers. Tomorrow night we will all journey to the homestead where Quiet Bear is being cared for. We will go not as warriors seeking battle, but as a people seeking to honor an act of unexpected kindness." The crowd erupted in surprised voices. Some people were excited by the chief's words, while others were concerned about the risks involved. What if they see us as a threat? Asked one of the mothers. What if they think we're coming to attack them? That is a risk we must take, Chief Strong Eagle replied. But I believe that people who would risk their own safety to help a stranger are not people who would harm us without cause. Broken Arrow stood up, his face showing his disagreement. Chief, this is madness. We're talking about approaching a settler homestead with our entire tribe. If something goes wrong, we could all be in danger. And if something goes right, Singing Bird countered, we could be taking the first step toward a peace that has seemed impossible for so long. The debate continued late into the night, but gradually the chief's vision began to take hold. The idea of honoring the settler family's kindness appealed to many people, especially the older members of the tribe who were tired of constant conflict. By morning, the decision had been made. The entire tribe would make the journey to the homestead. They would bring gifts to show their gratitude, and they would demonstrate that acts of kindness between their peoples were possible. But as the day progressed, and people began preparing for the journey, everyone understood that they were about to attempt something that had never been tried before. No one knew how the settler family would react when they discovered nearly 200 tribal members surrounding their home. As the sun began to set on what would be the most important day in the history of both communities, Chief Strong Eagle stood at the edge of his village and looked toward the forest. Tomorrow, everything would change. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, in a barn several miles away, Quiet Bear was finally beginning to recover. The fever that had nearly killed him was starting to break, and for the first time in days he was able to stay awake for more than a few minutes at a time. When he opened his eyes and saw the colorful quilt covering him, and when he realized that gentle hands had been caring for him in this strange place, Quiet Bear understood that something miraculous had happened. But he had no idea that his recovery was about to trigger an event that would be remembered for generations. Lucy woke up in the middle of the night, but not because of any sound. Instead, it was a feeling that something was different. The air outside seemed too quiet, like the whole world was holding its breath. She lay in her bed for a few minutes, listening to the silence, before getting up to look out her window. What she saw made her heart stop. In the pale moonlight, she could see shapes moving everywhere around their property. At first, her sleepy mind thought they might be trees swaying in the wind, but then she realized the truth. People were standing all around their homestead, so many that she couldn't count them all. Lucy's hands shook as she ran to her parents' room. "Mama, Papa," she whispered urgently, shaking her mother's shoulder. "Wake up, there are people outside, lots of people." Thomas was awake instantly, the way men who lived on the frontier learned to be. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, with Mary right behind him. When they saw what Lucy had seen, both parents felt their blood turn cold. "How many do you think there are?" Mary whispered. Thomas was trying to count, but it was impossible. The figures were arranged in a huge circle around their home and barn, standing so still they looked like statues. "At least 100, he said. Quietly, maybe twice that. Lucy pressed her face against the window, trying to understand what she was seeing. "Papa, why aren't they moving? If they wanted to hurt us, wouldn't they have done it already?" That was exactly what Thomas was wondering. In all the stories he had heard about conflicts between settlers and tribal groups, the attacks always came quickly and violently. This was something completely different. As the first light of dawn began to appear, the family could see more clearly. The people surrounding their property were men, women, and even children. They were arranged in perfect rows, all facing toward the homestead, but none of them were carrying weapons that the family could see. "I think they're waiting for something," Mary said. As the sun continued to rise, one figure separated itself from the group and began walking slowly toward the house. Thomas raised his rifle, but something about the man's movement made him hesitate. The approaching figure was walking with his hands visible and empty, in a way that seemed more respectful than threatening. When the man got closer, they could see that he was older, with gray hair and a dignified bearing. He stopped about 20 feet from their front door and spoke in heavily accented but clear English. "I am Chief Strong Eagle," he said in a voice that carried clearly in the morning air. "I come to speak with the family that has shown kindness to my nephew." Thomas and Mary looked at each other in amazement. The wounded man in their barn was related to the tribal chief. Slowly, Thomas opened the front door, though he kept his rifle ready. "What do you want?" he called out. "I want to thank you," Chief Strong Eagle replied simply. "My scouts have told me of your kindness to Quiet Bear. They have told me of the medicine you gave him, the food you shared, and the precious blanket your daughter placed over him. I have come with my people to honor what you have done." Lucy stepped forward, despite her mother's attempt to hold her back. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked. "The man in our barn?" Chief Strong Eagle's stern expression softened when he looked at the young girl. "Because of your family's care, his fever broke during the night. He will live." The relief that washed over Lucy's face was so obvious that even the chief could see it. Here was a child who had genuinely been worried about a stranger, someone from a completely different culture who she had never even spoken to. "Your daughter gave him her own blanket," Chief Strong Eagle continued, looking at Thomas and Mary. "In our culture, such a gift carries great meaning. It says that you see the person not as an enemy, but as someone deserving of your care and protection." Mary found her voice. "We couldn't just let him die. No matter who he was or where he came from, he needed help. And that," said Chief Strong Eagle, "is why we are here." At a signal from their leader, the entire group of tribal members began to move. But instead of advancing toward the house, they arranged themselves in an even more organized formation. The sight was both beautiful and overwhelming. Nearly 200 people moving with perfect coordination, their colorful clothing creating patterns against the white snow. "We have come to witness something that has never happened before," the chief explained. "We have come to see what it looks like when people choose kindness over fear." Lucy watched in amazement as some of the tribal members began to approach the house, but not in a threatening way. Instead, they were carrying things, beautiful blankets, carved wooden bowls, beaded jewelry, and other gifts. A woman who appeared to be about Mary's age stepped forward. She was carrying a blanket that was even more beautiful than the quilt Lucy had given away. The patterns were intricate and colorful, clearly representing many hours of careful work. "I am Singing Bird," the woman said. "Quiet Bear is my nephew? This blanket was made by my daughter, who is about the same age as your little one." She held the blanket out to Lucy. "She wanted me to give this to the girl who was willing to share her most precious possession with a stranger." Lucy looked at her parents, unsure of what to do. Mary nodded encouragingly, and Lucy stepped forward to accept the gift. The blanket was incredibly soft and warm, and the colors seemed to glow in the morning sunlight. "Thank you," Lucy said quietly then. Looked up at Singing Bird with curious eyes. "How did you know it was my most precious possession?" Singing Bird smiled. "Because we watched you carry it to the barn. We could see in the way you held it that it meant everything to you. And we could see in the way you gave it up that you understood something very important about what it means to truly care for someone." More tribal members came forward with gifts, but this wasn't just about presents. This was about recognition, respect, and the beginning of something that neither community had thought possible. Chief Strong Eagle asked if he could see Quiet Bear, and Thomas led him to the barn. When the chief saw his nephew lying peacefully under Lucy's grandmother's quilt, surrounded by signs of the care he had received, the old leader had to wipe tears from his eyes. Quiet Bear was awake and alert for the first time in days. When he saw his uncle, he tried to sit up, but Chief Strong Eagle motioned for him to rest. "Uncle," Quiet Bear said weakly, "these people saved my life. When I collapsed near their land, they could have left me to die. Instead, they brought me to safety and used their own supplies to help me heal." "I know," Chief Strong Eagle replied. "And now our entire tribe knows as well." Back outside, something remarkable was happening. The initial fear and tension was beginning to fade as both groups realized that this encounter was unlike anything either had experienced before. Some of the tribal children were shyly approaching Lucy, curious about this settler girl who had shown such kindness to one of their people. One little boy, who looked to be about 8 years old, came up to Lucy and offered her a small carved wooden bird. Lucy accepted it with a smile and then did something that surprised everyone. She ran back into the house and came out with one of her own small toys, a cloth doll that her mother had made for her. The exchange of these simple gifts between children seemed to break down the last barriers between the two groups. Adults on both sides began to relax and even attempt simple conversations. Despite the language differences. As the morning progressed, Chief Strong Eagle made an announcement that would be remembered for generations. From this day forward, he declared in a voice that carried to everyone present, this family and their descendants will be under the protection of our tribe. Any harm that comes to them will be considered harm to us. They have shown us that kindness can exist between our peoples, and we will honor that kindness with our loyalty. The declaration sent murmurs of amazement through both groups. Thomas and Mary understood the significance of what they were hearing. In a time when conflicts between settlers and tribal communities were common, they had just been promised protection that could save their lives in future troubles. But perhaps even more important than the promise of protection was what this moment represented. For the first time, members of both communities were seeing each other not as enemies, but as people capable of compassion and understanding. As the tribal members prepared to leave, Lucy ran to Chief Strong Eagle. Will I ever see Quiet Bear again? She asked. Will I know if he gets completely better? Chief Strong Eagle knelt down so he was at eye level with the young girl. Quiet Bear has asked if he can return when he is fully healed to thank your family properly. Would that be acceptable? Lucy's face lit up with joy. Yes. And maybe he could teach me some words in your language, and I could teach him some things too. The chief smiled. I think that would be very good for both of you. As the sun reached its highest point in the sky, the tribal members began their journey back to their village. But they left behind more than just gifts. They left behind the beginning of a friendship that would grow stronger over the years. Quiet Bear did return several weeks later, fully recovered and bearing additional gifts from his community. The friendship between the two families grew, and Lucy learned to speak some of the tribal language while teaching Quiet Bear to read English. Years later, when conflicts did arise between other settlers and tribal groups in the region,